Hello, and welcome to Ancient Stories in English. This channel tells history slowly and clearly so you can practice your English. Today, we are going to meet a man who lost. He lost the war. He lost the throne. He lost his life at the age of 30 on the bank of a river, surrounded by his enemies. The man who defeated him became the founding emperor of the Han Dynasty. And yet, more than 2,000 years later, it is not the winner that the Chinese people remember with love. It is the man who lost. His name is Xiang Yu, and this is his story. Now, let us begin. The year is 207 BC. In the north of China, a city called Julu is surrounded and slowly dying. For months, a massive Qin army of nearly 300,000 soldiers has held it under siege. The people inside are hungry, their supplies almost gone, their walls still standing. But everyone knows that cannot last much longer. Other rebel armies have come to help. They are camped on the hills nearby, watching the Qin forces below, organized and vast. And so they wait and they watch and no one moves. Then, from the south, a new army arrives. Around 50,000 soldiers cross the Yellow River and make camp on the far bank. And then, something strange happens. The soldiers begin destroying their own supplies. They smash their iron cooking pots. They burn what food they have left. They sink every boat they used to cross the river. When it is finished, each man carries only 3 days of rations, nothing more. No boats to return on, no supplies to fall back on, no escape of any kind. The rebel commanders watching from the hills do not understand what they are seeing. This army has just removed its own ability to survive unless it fights its way through. Then the attack begins. The Chu soldiers move into the Qin lines with a ferocity that the historians struggled to describe. They wrote that each man seemed to fight with the strength of 10, one engagement after another, 9 consecutive battles across a single day, and 9 consecutive victories. By nightfall, the great Qin army is shattered. Wang Li, the Qin commander, is captured. More than 100,000 Qin soldiers are dead or in retreat. The rebel commanders come down from their hills. The ones who watched and waited and did nothing. They walk into the Chu camp and they kneel before the man who led this army. They cannot bring themselves to look him in the eye. His name is Xiang Yu. He is 25 years old. And against an army 6 times the size of his own, on a battlefield with no retreat and no second chance, he won. To understand Xiang Yu, you need to understand the world he was born into, and what that world had already taken from his family before he was old enough to hold a sword. He was not a common soldier. He was not a farmer who picked up a weapon out of desperation. He came from the noble family of the Chu state, one of the 6 ancient kingdoms that Qin Shi Huang, the first emperor, unified China. His grandfather was Xiang Yan, a celebrated general of Chu, a man who spent his life defending his kingdom against Qin expansion. When Qin finally conquered Chu in 223 BC, Xiang Yan did not surrender. He died on the battlefield, fighting to the end for a kingdom that could no longer be saved. Xiang Yu never met his grandfather, but he grew up inside the story of his death. Inside a family that had lost everything to the Qin and had never stopped feeling that loss. It was not just loss, it was a duty. His uncle, Xiang Liang, took responsibility for the boy's education. He tried to teach him to read. Xiang Yu lost interest almost immediately. He tried to teach him swordsmanship. Xiang Yu picked it up quickly, then grew bored with that too. When his uncle pressed him on it, frustrated, the boy gave an answer that tells you almost everything you need to know about him. Reading, he said, is only useful for remembering names, and swordsmanship, one man can only defeat one other man. I want to learn something that can defeat 10,000. He was not lazy, and he was not arrogant in the way that foolish people are arrogant. He simply already understood at a very young age what he was for. The question was never whether he would fight. The question was always how large the battlefield would be. When Qin Shi Huang died, the empire he had spent his life building began to collapse almost immediately. Across China, rebellions broke out in every direction. And in that world, Xiang Yu was the strongest man. The historical records describe him as physically enormous, a man capable of lifting a heavy bronze cauldron by himself. But his power on the battlefield was not only physical, it was atmospheric. Soldiers who fought beside him did not simply follow orders. They believed, in a way that is difficult to explain rationally, that they could not lose as long as he was there. That kind of presence is rare in any era of history. At Julu, he proved that the belief was not misplaced. After the battle, the other rebel commanders did not come to negotiate with him, or to discuss terms, or to argue about what came next. They came down from their hills and they submitted quietly, completely, on their knees. These were experienced men, leaders of their own armies, men who had fought their own wars, and they knelt. He was 25 years old. He had just broken the main military force of the most powerful empire in Chinese history. At this point in the story, everything makes a certain kind of sense. A great man rises. A corrupt empire falls. The strongest takes his place at the top. For just a moment, a brief, clean moment, the world was simple. At this point, nothing in his world had ever told him he needed to change. Politics is not a battlefield, and that difference, quiet, invisible, but absolute, was something Xiang Yu never truly understood. After the fall of Qin, Xiang Yu held a banquet that Chinese history has never forgotten. It is known as the Feast at Hong Gate, and on the surface it looked like a celebration, but underneath it was something else entirely. Before the banquet began, Xiang Yu's most trusted advisor, Fan Zheng, came to him privately. "There is a man here tonight," Fan Zheng said, "who will become your greatest problem. He must be dealt with before he leaves." The man he was referring to was Liu Bang, a former village official of low birth, with no great name behind him. He had, by a stroke of timing, reached the old Qin capital before Xiang Yu, which technically entitled him to the title of King of Guanzhong according to an earlier promise. But to look at him, he seemed like a man the world had not yet noticed. Fan Zheng arranged for a swordsman to kill Liu Bang during the feast. Xiang Yu canceled it. Not because he felt any warmth toward Liu Bang, but because Liu Bang seemed too small for the gesture. In Xiang Yu's understanding of the world, you did not kill a man like that at a dinner table. Enemies were faced on the battlefield, in open combat, where strength decided everything. A quiet assassination felt beneath him. What he could not see, what he had no framework to see, was that Liu Bang was never going to fight him on a battlefield if he could possibly avoid it. Liu Bang did not think the way Xiang Yu thought. He did not measure the world in terms of strength and direct confrontation. He measured it in patience, in relationships, in the slow accumulation of people who owed him something. The man who walked away from Hong Gate that night would go on to found the Han Dynasty, one of the greatest empires in Chinese history, and take the name Gaozu, the high ancestor, the father of a civilization. His descendants would rule for 400 years. The Chinese people would eventually name themselves after his dynasty. Xiang Yu let him go. After the Qin dynasty collapsed, Xiang Yu stood at the center of a broken world and made the most important decision of his life. He did not make himself emperor. He was the most powerful man in China. The throne was his to take. And yet he chose instead to divide China into 18 separate kingdoms, distribute the land among the rebel leaders who had fought alongside him, and name himself hegemon king of Western Chu, the strongest among many, rather than the ruler of all. In his own mind, this made sense. The Qin Empire had erased the old kingdoms, the old noble families, the old order his grandfather had served and died for. Xiang Yu wanted to restore all of that. It was, at its heart, an act of loyalty to the past. But the past was gone, and what he built in its place was not a restored world. It was 18 separate fires, each one waiting for a reason to burn. Almost immediately, kingdoms began turning against each other, and each time a conflict broke out, Xiang Yu had to march there personally to resolve it, because he was the only force capable of doing so. He was the solution to every problem, which meant he was also the reason none of the problems ever truly ended. Meanwhile, Liu Bang, given a distant Western kingdom apparently too unimportant to worry about, was quietly building, recruiting talented people. keeping his promises, earning loyalty the slow way, in all the ways Xiang Yu could not or refused to. He had built a world that only worked if he personally held it together. And no man, not even Xiang Yu, could hold 18 fires at once, forever. Somewhere in those years of endless campaigning, something began to change. Not on the battlefield, but in the minds of the people watching from a distance. In the early days, the fear surrounding Xiang Yu's name had carried a kind of respect inside it. People feared him the way they feared a force of nature, with awe, even with reluctant admiration. He was terrifying, yes, but he was also magnificent. But as the wars dragged on, stories spread. Cities that surrendered peacefully were sometimes destroyed anyway. Populations that offered no resistance were punished regardless. And people began to calculate, if surrendering offered no guarantee of safety, then there was no reason to surrender at all. Cities held out longer. Rebels found it easier to recruit. The name that had once made armies kneel without a fight was now making enemies out of people who had not yet chosen a side. He was still winning battles. On any given day, in any given engagement, he remained the most dangerous man on the field. But the world around him was slowly reorganizing itself against him, and he could not see it because it was not happening anywhere he was looking. He was still the strongest man in every battle, but the war was no longer being decided there. By 202 BC, Xiang Yu's army is surrounded at Gaixia, trapped between the forces of Liu Bang, Han Xin, and Peng Yue closing in from 3 sides. The Chu soldiers are exhausted, and the supplies are almost gone. There is nowhere left to go. And then, in the darkness of the night, they hear something unexpected. Music, voices rising from the Han camps surrounding them, singing folk songs from the Chu homeland. Songs that every man in Xiang Yu's army grew up with. Songs that belonged to mothers and villages and lives left behind. It is the work of Han Xin, one of Liu Bang's most brilliant generals. The strategy is simple and completely devastating. If the enemy is singing our songs, the soldiers think, perhaps Chu has already fallen. Perhaps everything we were fighting for is already gone. That night, hope drains out of the Chu camp like water from a broken vessel. Some men slip away into the darkness without a word. Xiang Yu cannot sleep. He sits alone in his tent, drinking, and beside him is a woman named Yu, his closest companion, who had stayed with him through the war without ever being asked to leave. He takes up a brush and composes a poem. It has survived in Chinese history for more than 2,000 years, exactly as he wrote it that night. My strength could move mountains. My spirit covered the world. But the times are against me, and even my horse will not go. If the horse will not go, what can I do? You, my you, what will become of you? He is not speaking as a king or a general. He is speaking as a man who already knows how the story ends. In the morning, he rides out with 800 soldiers and breaks through the encirclement, moving south. By the time he reaches the bank of the Wu River, only 28 men are still with him. A boat is waiting. The boatman speaks to him. Cross the river, he says. Go back to Jiangdong, back to the land where you began, where your family's name still means something. You can rebuild. You can come back. Xiang Yu looks at the river. On the other side is Jiangdong, his homeland, the place that gave him his first 8,000 soldiers at the very beginning of everything. Young men who believed in him before anyone else did. He thinks about how many of them are still alive. Even if the elders of Jiangdong were willing to forgive me and make me king again, he says quietly, how could I ever look them in the face? He sends his horse across the river, unwilling to let the animal die for a battle that is already decided. Then he turns around, draws his sword, and walks back toward the Han army. 28 men against thousands. He fights until he can no longer stand. He dies on the bank of the Wu River. He is 30 years old. Xiang Yu won battles that no one else could win. At Julu, he led 50,000 soldiers against nearly 300,000 and broke them in a single day. At Pengcheng, he took 30,000 cavalry and destroyed a coalition of 560,000 in half a day, while his main army was fighting a completely separate war in another part of the country. He is often compared to Alexander the Great. Alexander never lost a battle in his life. Neither, in any meaningful sense, did Xiang Yu. The difference is that Alexander died at the peak of his empire, and Xiang Yu died surrounded on a riverbank with 28 men. But history is not only fought on battlefields. It is fought in quiet rooms, at dinner tables, in the slow decisions of who to trust and who to reward and when to stop. And in those rooms, Xiang Yu was completely lost. He spent his whole life fighting to restore a world that no longer existed. The world of his grandfather, of the Six Kingdoms, of the old noble order that Qin Shi Huang had spent 15 years destroying. That world was gone before Xiang Yu was old enough to fight for it, and no amount of battlefield genius could bring it back. Liu Bang did not win because he was stronger. He won because he understood the world as it actually was. Not as it should have been, not as it once had been, but as it was, right now, in front of him. Xiang Yu did not lose because he was weak. He lost because he was, from the very beginning to the very end, exactly who he had always been. And that had always been enough, until it wasn't. Thank you for listening to Ancient Stories in English. If this story was interesting to you, please share it with a friend. We will see you in the next episode.